Welcome to the Fearless Health Podcast with host Dr. Anne-Marie Barter.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Fearless Health YouTube channel. We are really excited to have you. And please remember to subscribe below and say hello, or also leave a topic that you want to hear in the comments. And we are going to do our very best to get to it and to cover that topic on the YouTube channel right here. Also, if you are driving in the car, we try to make this convenient for you. So our podcasts can all be found on either iTunes or Stitcher under Fearless Health Podcast. Without further ado, let's get into it today, and we are so excited to have you. Thank you. Jenn, thank you so much for being here today. I'm super excited to have you, and it's going to be so fun to dig into autoimmunity, which I know a lot of people are interested about. But before we get into that, I'd like to really hear your story and how you have managed and or healed your own autoimmunity.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. First of all, Dr. Ann, I'm excited to be here and, share my personal story to help inspire others, and then share some information today too that'll help people that might be dealing with this. Should I tell the short version or the long version, I guess, but ultimately, long story short, I'll say is that when I was in about my mid-30s, so somewhere around like 30, I think it was 33 or so at this point in time, I started just having like health issues that were accumulating. So I'd already previously had a health journey in my 20s where I'd recovered from skin cancer and healed a lot of stuff that was going on, like chronic fatigue and all those types of things that were happening with me then. And I was on this great path. And then I started working from home, doing the work that I do now. And slowly over the course of 2 years of working from home, my health started to decline again. Like I started to put on weight, and over the course of 2 years, it just slowly accumulated. And next thing I knew, I was 15 pounds heavier. And then I started having cystic acne, and I had never had acne in my entire life. Like even as a teenager going through puberty, that just wasn't a common thing for me at all. So I started to question, with that, what was happening. And a couple other little light bulb moments that when I look back at the picture, I'm like, oh, that's what it was. Like, over that period of time, one instance I went to the dentist and he pointed out that I was grinding my teeth. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And being in the functional health space, I knew that teeth grinding could be highly correlated with parasites and Candida. So I did a stool sample test again, and sure enough, found that I had overgrowth of these, pathogens or gut bugs, as we call them, going on in my gut again, which I thought was interesting because I'd cleaned it up quite a bit again in my 20s, back to that story. And then what really started to scream at me more, like when my body started screaming at me more, was like I had a breakthrough period, even though I was on birth control. And I hadn't had my period actually in years because I had taken birth control for so long. I just thought that was like odd. And then all of a sudden I started having really coming through like 2 layers of clothing. And so my hormones were basically going crazy. And this was going on for a while. And then with divine intervention, just one day I was in my office working and opened up the closet door. Like it was literally 2 feet away from my desk, and noticed that there was black mold on the ceiling. And so that led me down a pathway to do some other testing, come to find out like that, mold is extremely toxic. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk about that with your listeners at all, but it is so toxic. It elevates estrogen in the body. It can trigger thyroid antibodies just from the toxicity, as well as elevated estrogen can do that. So I found out, discovered I was estrogen dominant. I was hypothyroid at the time and had triggered Hashimoto's. So that led me down a path to researching, exploring autoimmunity some more. I mean, I'd done a little bit of work in that area with some of the clients that I had worked with, but now I was dealing with myself, and I plummeted into the information and just tried to learn everything that I could on how do we reverse this. And I was fortunate enough, like I caught my case pretty early on, and I was able to reverse my Hashimoto's within 6 months, and I still sit here today in remission. And I'd love to share some of the things that helped me do that today too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we totally covered mold on the podcast a couple times. I personally had my own mold story too, associated with that, and I had low-grade Hashimoto's. I wasn't full-blown, but I definitely had antibodies to my thyroid. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of mold. I pretty much mold is a huge part of my treatment and my practice, huge. But yeah, I think it's one of the most overlooked, underappreciated issues, and most people don't believe that they have it in their house, or I don't see it, so I don't have it kind of rhetoric, which is just unfortunate because mold is, contaminating about 50% of the US buildings.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an insane amount. So, I mean, if you just throw a dart, you're going to hit somebody and they probably have had mold exposure. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yes. So I totally agree. And boy, does it affect the female reproductive system in such a big way, and people don't correlate that. So I think it's so amazing you made that correlation, because it is super powerful. Fixing mold fixes a lot of hormone reproduction. So, okay. So you had autoimmunity, and you're looking in your gut, and you're looking at mold. And so you know that these things are existing. So what are some of the things that you realized at looking this with a treatment plan? Because I think what people like to do when they find something, they're like, oh, mold is causing all my problems. But you rattled off a couple things that you may or may not have had parasites in your stool. You definitely had Candida, and you definitely found mold, and we're having female reproductive issues. So you're looking at this and you're like, well, I need to kind of pair these things out. So it wasn't a one size fits all treatment, just take this and you're better. So kind of what did that treatment journey look like?
Yeah. And it sounds like our approaches are very similar in that I like to look at the whole person. And so I looked at myself that same way, because the body it's a network of complex systems, right? So when one system in the body is affected, there's a downstream effect to a lot of the other ones. So it's not a singular approach like you were alluding to. It's got to be this holistic approach to everything, right? So what's going on with our hormones impacts our gut, and what's going on in our gut impacts our hormones and affects our liver and like all these other things. But I do think that one of the foundations of overall healing is working on gut health, because when we take a look at the gut, like that's where the majority of our immune system resides. It's also where we absorb nutrients that are then used as, building blocks for so many other things in the body and for repair. It's also where we excrete toxins and help to move things out of the body. And then it's also where we produce a lot of our neurotransmitters and even manufacture like antioxidants like melatonin, which also helps us to sleep. And if you're not sleeping, you can't really heal at all. So I do in my work, like the gut has to be a huge focal point in helping. When it helped myself to move forward, and it helped others to move forward too. And we have to look at, what are all the contributors to a dysfunctional gut? So certainly I had something like mold that was going on that acts as a major stressor. It just produces all these toxic elements that start to degrade the intestinal lining. But then we get other contributors to that side of that effect as well. So then you start to develop like food sensitivities, which we, can see a lot of times in autoimmune clients, is that not only are they reactive to some of the more commonly inflammatory foods like gluten, dairy, sugar, soy, but then they also become reactive to foods that contain lectins, which is kind of the concept or approach of the autoimmune paleo protocol, is to remove some of those other inflammatory foods, but they can also have individualized food sensitivities to other things outside of those dietary approaches. So that was one of the things that I dove into looking at for myself, is what are some of my food sensitivities. I did actually go on a modified autoimmune protocol that also incorporated like the things that I was specifically sensitive to, because those food sensitivities are oftentimes a result of a dysfunctional intestinal lining, but they actually contribute back to it being in dysfunctional as well because of the inflammation that it ensues. So removing those from a period of time just helps us to calm the inflammatory fire, so that again, the body has this space to heal along with that. And then I think the other big piece that you kind of touched on is some of the gut bugs, the parasites, bacteria, yeast overgrowth. When we have a weakened immune system and maybe a dysfunctional intestinal tract, we become more susceptible to these parasites, bacteria, and yeast overgrowth. And we have to ask the question, what makes us a good host for those things? And something like mold, certainly, again, like, depresses and suppresses the immune system, makes us a good host for those things. But also, like, just stress in general, like anytime we encounter stress, it can create negative biochemicals or biofilm as well that makes us more susceptible to those things, toxins, different foods, the sensitivities, and the inflammation overall. So that was also part of my protocol, was identifying what some of those gut bugs were, and then taking action to eliminate them, because they produce their own toxic waste and inflammation as well. And when I work through protocols like that, it looks like, fixing the diet. Let's remove foods that are going to feed these type of gut bugs, as well as that are creating an environment for them to thrive with inflammation and things like that. Let's implement some natural herbal supplements, things like L-glutamine, fish oils, proprietary blends that are going to help to restore the gut line integrity, to help with the healing process. And then I also love to use healing foods, as I call them, or food additives, to help with that process too. So some other things just within your daily diet that can help with healing the gut are things like green tea. Green tea has an active ingredient called polyphenol, EGCG, which helps to modulate genes and produce an anti-inflammatory effect. So having a cup of green tea per day can actually help to keep inflammation at bay and really keep your gut happy also, right? And it does help with some of the beneficial bacteria in the gut as well, which help to fight those things off. And then collagen. Collagen is another great kind of food additive. It's something really easy to add into your diet that provides the amino acids that are necessary in order for the body to repair the intestinal lining or the damage that has occurred. And it's like so simple to add this to like your daily tea or coffee or water. And then bone broth, that's another really easy one that you can incorporate, that is rich in minerals for the immune system. Plus it has other gut healing properties such as glutamine, again, collagen, glycine, and proline that really help to that healing process. And for those that can tolerate it, I think fermented foods are another great food, healing additive, because they help us to increase that diversity of bacteria, the healthy bacteria that help to fight off like the gut bugs and also help to reduce inflammation and keep the gut healthy. So those are some of the things that I implemented as part of like healing my gut, and also just overcoming this mold, Hashimoto's type of scenario that I had going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's it's interesting, like what comes into my office, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but what really comes into my office is people are like trying to kind of like self-treat, and they're still suffering because they haven't gotten rid of the gut bugs generally. And I think an important point is that there's definitely an order to treat things in. It's interesting, and I don't know what your thought process is on this, but for me, I don't like to run a food sensitivity test until I know I've cleaned out the gut bugs, because I did that on one patient. I'll never forget this, and this patient came back with everything positive. I was like, so you can have cheese. Yeah. You can have cheese. Like, and I mean, I'm not even it was so bad. I'm like, I can't even show you this test. You can have cheese and like broccoli, but not too much, because it was moderate. So, I mean, and so I think looking at that, I mean, I think clearing out the gut bugs is so critical to, getting rid of, all their toxic byproducts and healing up that. But there's definitely an order, and I think people miss the order. Like, people want to start with leaky gut when you have all of these crazy pathogens in your gut, and you're not even going to be able to, heal that up, right? And I mean, I'm assuming you have a pretty similar philosophy to me, I would assume, but.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there is an order, and I see clients that, come to me and they're like, I did a Candida diet and I felt like a little bit better, like after doing it, but then all my symptoms came right back,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that is where they're missing some of the pieces of the puzzle that we're talking about. So generally, like when I take this approach, I usually run a couple of labs all at the same time to see the big picture of how the systems of the body are interacting. So I'll do like a GI map stool sample test. I'll do a Dutch test, oftentimes like a hair tissue mineral analysis test. And then I will do like a food sensitivity test so we can just see the big picture. And one of the things that I think is really important to your point is like, about the food sensitivity test is like correlating it back to the person. Like you still have to take that information and make it realistic for them. And I'll, when I look at a food sensitivity test, I'm like, okay, let's look at this realistically and see like, and prioritize, what are the most important foods to stay away from? Because we do want to reduce that inflammation, but I also want to make it realistic so that they can eat, like you were saying,
Yeah.
and when I approach like a supplement protocol, like I have a very strategic approach to that, where the first supplements that I actually implement are things that are going to help aid in digestive support and repair, like laying the foundation and getting them ready to detox out gut bugs. So we'll do like a digestive enzyme and a probiotic and the fish oils and some glutamine, maybe one or two other things that help to restore the integrity of the lining. And then I'll actually move on and I'll implement some things to help with like adrenal support or like minerals. Cause with Candida and things like that, it strips us as minerals, which makes oxalates worse sometimes, which can produce more Candida. So we want to balance those minerals out. And then I'll go into like, what are detoxification support things? So like a liver support supplement and like glutathione per se. So now we've laid this really strong foundation, then we move into a detox phase where and I think in the detox of the gut bugs phase, that's where I find that being really strategic about the order of things is also important. So like if they've got multiple pathogens, like let's just say they have a parasite, a bacteria, and a yeast overgrowth, which is common to see because all those organisms feed off of each other. Through the training that I've received, at least, like, what we've kind of identified is that parasites are on the bottom of the food chain, and then you've got bacteria that grows off of that, and then yeast that grows on top of it. So when I see Candida, I'm like, Candida is not actually the problem. A lot of times it's these other gut bugs. And so we'll go after like parasites first and then bacteria. And then the yeast usually resolves itself on its own because we've cut off the food supply for it. And maybe we just do a little cleanup with some Saccharomyces boulardii or something kind of like gentle to mop up any rest of the yeast. And that's where I see like a lot of these people that have just done a Candida diet per se, or Candida cleanse, like they have reoccurring symptoms because they actually didn't address some of the underlying things that were feeding that in the first place, right? And I also think it's important to prep the body for some of the detox, because I've also talked to so many people that have felt terrible when they've done something like a Candida detox because their body wasn't fully supported to be able to detox those things out. Like your adrenals have to be online, like your liver has to be running good. We want the intestine to be supported, that has to move all that toxic element out. And they usually like feel a lot better when we have that foundation in place when we move into that detox phase.
Yeah, the Candida piece, when people just say, oh, I have Candida, I just need to do a Candida cleanse, it's just Candida. I'm like, it's not just Candida. It's just not. You've got mold, you've got parasites, you've got bacteria, you have all these other things. Like Candida is opportunistic. It is only there because it, and if you, like, to your point, if you clean up the other stuff, Candida goes away. It depends on like what it looks like. But seriously, I think that has been just so common in, I think, the wellness community, just to talk about Candida. And I'm not really sure where that came from or why, but that's like the major detox. And I mean, it's 100% because most people have it, but most people have problems up the line. So
exactly. Yeah. It's like, what's making you, we always go to ask the question, like, what makes you a good host for Candida? We have to look at all those things. And I agree. I'm like, where did this like obsession about Candida come from? I don't know where, but circling it back to autoimmunity also is that there are like certain strains of parasites and bacteria and yeast that actually trigger the autoimmune process even more, like Klebsiella or Blastocystis hominis or H. pylori. Those are some of the things that have been synonymous with Hashimoto's specifically. And so that's another area where I've seen, some of these autoimmune clients trying to address Candida and still not resolving their symptoms. And when we actually do some deeper stool testing and things like that, we can see some of these autoimmune trigger pathogens. And when we clean those things up, they start to make more progress in, feeling better and getting their antibodies down too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of those are triggered through the mouth.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are oral bacteria of dental work gone wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that that's also just so overlooked. But yeah, another day for that, another day.
Yeah.
So when we're looking, so are there other things that you feel like is really important? So, talking about treating the parasites, treating the bacteria, potentially treating the Candida, treating the mold, to reverse autoimmunity. Are there other supportive things that you like to recommend to kind of to support people?
Yeah, I do. And these, again, are actually some really simple things that have actually been around for a long time that anybody can do. And one of them is deep breathing. And this might sound surprising to people, but our body can only heal when it's in a relaxed state. And the majority of the day, you're in fight or flight mode, whether you know it or not. I mean, it's just a factor of our modern day life and society. Like when you may think that you're relaxed because you're just working around the house doing, chores. That actually triggers the fight or flight response. Whenever we're constantly moving, it can trigger this fight or flight response. And if you look at how we eat, like how many of us sit down for lunch and work while we eat, right? So that's triggering that fight or flight response. And when we're in fight or flight, all of our resources are pushed outward to the body. So like all your blood flow goes out to your arms and legs for quick moving and to your brain for quick thinking, which robs resources from the digestive system to A, be able to digest, and B, for all the organs internally to be able to heal. So deep breathing is a tool that we can use that automatically flips the switch in the brain. It takes us out of that fight or flight response into what we call parasympathetic mode, which is the rest or digest mode, right? And so the more that we can get into that rest and digest mode, the more healing can happen in the body. So the more repair of the intestinal lining. But also when we're in that rest and digest mode, it's called rest and digest because it actually helps us to optimize digestion. And so we talk about something like, healing from mold or healing autoimmune conditions or even getting past these gut bugs. We want to make sure that we're absorbing nutrients as optimally as possible. So if you're spending good money on high quality foods and supplements, don't you want to make sure that you're getting the most out of that and not flushing it down the toilet? So one of the things that I kind of coach some of my clients around doing every single time you sit down to eat is do 5 to 10 rounds of deep breathing, like inhale for 5 seconds, hold it for 5 seconds, and then exhale for 7 seconds and repeat that 5 to 10 times. And it's fascinating what a lot of them will report back is, one is that their digestion is much better, like their bowel movements improve, bloating starts to diminish for them as well. And they also feel more satisfied after eating because they actually digested their food. So that helps to reduce digestive stress. It helps to get us in that healing place and absorb more nutrients. So that has been such a great little trick up my sleeve that I recommend a lot of times. And then another, really great one that I love that's been around in the naturopathic community for a long time and in Ayurvedic medicine is castor oil packs. So whenever I bring this up to clients, they're like, oh my God, I remember my grandma used to talk about taking a tablespoon of castor oil a day. And I don't necessarily recommend ingesting it for clients, but it is possible to ingest it. It actually has a lot of great antimicrobial benefits, specifically for dental health, as you were mentioning. So I use castor oil to do oil pulling. A lot of people use coconut oil instead, and castor oil has even stronger antimicrobial benefits to it. So you actually only need to pull with castor oil for 5 minutes versus coconut oil. It's like the recommendation is, 15 to 20 minutes. So we can use it for that purpose to help cleanse keep our oral health good, which is, like you said, where a lot of these pathogens can get started. But then also doing a castor oil pack over the abdomen, which targets a couple different areas for us. Like one, it helps to stimulate detoxification and improve liver function. But the properties of castor oil are very anti-inflammatory, so it can help to reduce inflammation in the intestinal lining. It also helps to reduce cortisol levels in the body and boost oxytocin levels. So again, reducing that fight or flight stress response, improving overall feeling of well-being, improving sleep as a result of that too, which helps us to heal. It has prostaglandins in it that help to balance our hormones, which, as we talked about, the systems of the body can be interlinked and created. And it helps to improve bowel movements, prevent constipation, and do all these other amazing things for us. Castor oil pack 3 to 5 times a week, because it basically 10x's the results for any other kind of therapies or things that you're doing. And it's really soothing, and it gives you a reason to relax in the evening time too. I tell them, I'm like, put on your castor oil pack. I'm all about multitasking. So I'm like, put on your castor oil pack, meditate at the same time, kill two birds with one stone, or you can lay there and relax and watch TV. Or if you're like a super multitasker like me, I'm like, wear my castor oil pack, meditate, and sit in my sauna all at the same time to do all the things,
That's impressive. That is a lot. So what about sauna therapy? Are you a fan of sauna therapy?
I'm a huge fan of sauna therapy, and I use it myself personally. I have for years. I did notice, when I was going through kind of the depths of healing Hashimoto's and the mold stuff, my tolerance for it wasn't as strong in terms of temperature and amount of time that I could sit in there. So I feel I'm probably feeling my healthiest here today. So I can do 140 degrees for 30 minutes, maybe even more if I wanted to. But when I was in that time frame, I had to really dial down the temperature to 110, 120 degrees and maybe just 15 to 20 minutes. Otherwise, I would feel too fatigued, afterwards. And that's even with doing, binders and things like that to help move the toxins out. So I think I caution people, depending on where they're at, in their healing process and the depth of stuff that they might be detoxing, let's just take it cautiously so that we don't overwhelm the body with too much demand and work. But I do think it's a great complementary therapy for what most people are trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people report, I think, even less aches and pains is a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks believe that that saunas are really helping to move and detox out the toxins. I mean, I think it depends on what your theory is on autoimmunity, but I think toxins play a huge role in autoimmunity. Environmental chemicals, metals, benzene, gasoline byproducts, which we're exposed to so much, and they're part of our natural everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
And then mold on top of that, our body just can't even detoxify at all. I mean, about 10 years ago, I said, we're exposed to 80,000 chemicals every 7 days. Now it's 80,000 chemicals every single day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just a huge body burden on us. So, I mean, I'm a huge fan. I personally have a sauna. I sit in it quite a bit. I'm a huge fan of them. I think that they actually do a ton of good. And I love the way that I feel after sitting in it. Yeah. But you're totally right. I think a lot of folks try to go too hard, too big, too fast. They try to sit in there for a super long time. They get dizzy. They're completely fatigued the next day. Because if a little bit was good, then more is better, right?
Right.
But that's not the case, really. It's not the case.
Yeah. And I think it's just so dependent. I even if I have a stressful week or a really stressing day for some reason, worked out hard in the morning, stressful work day, I will take a break from my sauna that night, because it's all you're kind of describing. It's the compounding factors that lead to the eventual breakdown of the body, right? It is the toxins, it's the foods, it's all the stress in our life, it's all these other things. And so one of the concepts that I talk about a lot with people is being able to identify the burden of stress on your body at any point in time and knowing what to do to mitigate that, or making conscious choices from that place, so that you're constantly just kind of creating a balance. You're never going to live in a bubble, and you can't be perfect. Like, we can't always see, hear, and feel or smell all the toxins in our environment, but we know that they're there. So I think we just have to do work every single day to alleviate some of that stress burden that's happening.
What are some of the things that you wish you would have known before you ended up, with Hashimoto's? What would have been things that you would have done to prevent it or done differently? Now knowing what you know.
Yeah, I'm like, I wish I would have known about the mold sooner. I don't know that it's something that I wish that I would have known necessarily, but I wish that I would have taken action sooner. And what I mean by that is, and I think that we all do this, like even us as health practitioners, is over, as I was describing, it was like this slow build over the course of 2 years where things in my health just started going downhill. And I kept deprioritizing myself. Like, oh, I'll get to that later. Oh, I'm doing all the things that I can, or like beating myself up for the weight that I had gained, or, then I started kind of seeking out, like reaching out to my other practitioner friends, because I felt like I was doing all the right things, and I think that's one of the clues about mold that, looking back now, that I can kind of explain to people is like, when you're doing all the things and you're still just treading water, start thinking mold, right? Because there's something environmental, because there's something there that's holding you back. And so, I kept chalking it up to like, oh, I'm just getting older. I'm in my 30s now. My hormones are changing. This must be natural. It's like normal. And now, and like, I already kind of knew before that was a bunch of BS. And now I know it even more. And I tell clients that all the time. It's like, your age doesn't matter. Like, your gender doesn't matter. None of these things matter. Like, I think that we need to pay more attention into our bodies, because there is no doctor or test or anybody else that knows your body better than you do. And if there's something that's intuitively you feel is wrong, like I did, then you need to pay attention to that and don't wait on it, because then you will, get down this cycle. Or maybe you can catch something even earlier on than I did and reverse it and have that, opportunity, essentially. So that was probably one of my biggest takeaways from that experience, was like, I will no longer deprioritize myself. I will no longer push something off when it comes to my health. Like, if there's something that doesn't feel right, I'm on it right away, because I don't want to end up in that place again, And I think that in society, what we've come to, like Dr. Tom O'Brien talks about this, I'm going to quote him here, is like, just because something is common does not mean that it's normal. But that's what we've come to like accept, right? Like, oh, well, everybody, has a terrible time with menopause, or everybody goes through hormonal changes in their 30s, or everybody experiences a common cold or flu. Well, just because it's common doesn't mean that it's necessarily normal. We've just grown to accept that, and it doesn't have to be that way.
And I think, you talked about health people deprioritizing themselves, which is totally true. But other people that totally deprioritize themselves as a common, moms, people that are busy and they just never have the time for themselves, whatever it is, whatever takes priority, their career, their children, this, that, the other thing. And then, you start having children that will start acting up. And, if the mom was in a really good spot, then, that would bleed over to the kids. And so, you see this, it's so important to it's not a good thing to put your health off. It's an important thing to address, because the people around you are so affected by that. I mean, and I think that somehow that has been looked on in society as heroic. Like, I'm going to suffer for these people. And that's not okay. It's not good. It's not good.
Exactly. And I'm hoping that, I know we've all been going through this pandemic thing together. And that's actually one of the things that I hope people take out of this is, the classic case of somebody like feeling under the weather and going into work sick, and then they infect the entire office building, right? And we've been doing that for so long. And if you're sick, stay home. Because if you just stayed home for that one day and allowed your body to like sleep and rest and relax, then you would get over that cold or flu or whatever it is within probably 24 to 48 hours, versus you hear these people who've been dealing with this hacking cough for 10, 15, 20 days. And I'm like, I think that this pandemic is going to, it's kind of like reset our perspective on that, where, oh, if I'm sick, I don't go out in public, right? I need to prioritize myself, like nothing else matters. And I totally agree with you. I mean, women are totally guilty about this, and not that we shouldn't feel ashamed for being guilty of doing it. And then the career types. I mean, I tend to work with a lot of executive level career type people that are single. They don't have kids, but what they've done their entire life is sacrifice their health in pursuit of their career. And that was me prior to getting into this work. That was one of the reasons why I had the health issues to start with in my 20s, is that I was just that like super A-type personality, overachiever, doing sports, internship, full-time at school and college, managing a part-time job, all these things. Because it's like a badge of honor, to do all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of autoimmune people are that way too. Like they've just run themselves to the ground, where their body is like so broken down that now this autoimmune process has been triggered ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I know that you sauna, I know you do castor oil packs and meditate together all in one. What are a few other things that you do to keep yourself healthy?
Sleep is critically important to me. That like nobody messes with my sleep. So I often say that like, I think we need to learn to value sleep more than diet and exercise in a lot of ways, because if you're not sleeping good and sleeping during the right times according to your circadian rhythm, it's basically kind of canceling out all of your diet and exercise efforts. And so I am very adamant about being asleep by 10 p.m. Pretty much every night out of the week. Sometimes it's even earlier, like 9 or 9:30. And there are the few times of the year where I go to a wedding or we go out dancing in Vegas or something where I stay up and I feel it the next day. But I do think that sleep is so, so important. And we just, with the pandemic, we just got a puppy and we had to wake up every couple of hours to let the puppy out, which is great. But I was like, it's so disruptive to my sleep. I was brain foggy, the next day trying to work, and I don't have kids, so I don't mean to offend people with kids, but I was like, why people like do this to themselves with kids? And this goes on for years. I was like, I don't understand. So sleep is also super important for my own personal just well-being and health. Exercise and being out in nature is also really critical for me. And it's not about burning calories or any of that stuff. If I don't move my body on a daily basis, I just, from a mental health standpoint, don't feel as great. So that is another huge part of my routine, I would say too.
Awesome. Well, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I am pretty active with blogging and stuff. I have a website. You can find me at holistichealthboss.com. Holistic is spelled with a W, just like the word whole for whole foods or whole body. And then I also love spending time on Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram at Holistic Health Boss. And I do have a Facebook page too, where I post up content and tips and resources over there as the Holistic Health Boss as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. This was awesome. This was a really fun interview. And all of you listeners out there, if you want to see this live, please go to YouTube, to the Fearless Health channel, hit subscribe, tell us what you want to hear next. We really want to hear your comments, get your feedback on that. And if you like what we're doing here, please give us 5 stars and give us a shout out, okay? We will talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching today on the Fearless Health YouTube channel. If you liked what you heard today, remember to subscribe below, because we have so much more great information always coming out. And if there's a topic you want to hear about that we haven't released yet, please place that in the comments below and let us know what you want to hear more of in the comments, or just say hi. We really want to hear from you because we do this for you. So thank you again for watching. Take care until the next time.